And welcome to another weekly demo now on Tuesday because we had a holiday back in our country. And today we want to share some progress that we did over the previous week. So let's get started with what we promised. And last week we promised to finish working with dispatchers and begin working on components. We almost finished on dispatchers and found some new problems, which we are going to talk today. So let's first start showing off the components. We started from the most simple ones, which had less dependencies. And this was a link component. And we can see that we have typed the component and moved all the typings into the specific file, link.type.ts. And inside, we keep all of the types for each definition, like for mapping of state to props, mapping for dispatch to props, and then we are reusing them. And you can see them being reused here. As you can see, like the link container map state to props is connected and joined together with the container props that generally exist. And this allows us to basically reuse the code, and we plan to continue moving onwards in this manner. However, when we started working with components, it quickly turned out that starting from simple components is not a great idea. And this is because basically we have to rely on props that will be passed into the component. And we sometimes don't know, or maybe are not sure that the type which is passed to us as a prop is correct. Therefore, we had to basically rethink our strategy of rewriting components from the bottom to the top and start doing them from top to the bottom, starting from the more complicated ones like linked or like links or like category or like product. And this immediately caused a lot of trouble because we went deeper into, like, for example, category dispatcher. And initially what we have already did, as you can see, we have rewritten it to be typed, and we have migrated the query dispatcher. Now it accepts category query, like query and data types, that query options and data types that will be used inside. And it basically has the same flow, nothing is changed, just the types appeared. But in case of linked products dispatcher, the more complicated one, we can see that we internally have used the getIndexProduct utility function, which we initially have wrote to basically take into account props that were passed in. But in reality, we had to rely on data, and therefore we now again rewriting utilities to have proper types which are taking in account the only source of truth that we have, which is the query data. And now they are more robust, I would say, but this approach means we are not taking them as we did previously in batches, like just go through all queries. We now are going through more complicated components and getting deeper inside, like, okay, let's go into dispatcher, let's see what this dispatcher does, let's see if these types matches our requirements, etc., etc. So basically we have changed our strategy of rewriting from going by category of a module, like a utility or a dispatcher, etc. Now we are going from the component itself down to utilities, and we hope that we won't need to change much. However, we understand that some modifications will be required. Yes, it could be easier. It could have been easier to do it right from the start, but we had to adjust with time. So the migration is going, and currently we can mark the initial plan as changed. But however, we have already migrated utilities, queries, dispatchers, reducers, and basically everything but the components. However, component migration becomes more complicated now, knowing that we cannot simply use dispatchers as we have initially typed them, because we relied on prop types while we should have relied on the data coming from us from the queries. So With that said, we are pretty much on the line to finish our TypeScript migration as we planned, with some little delays, but we plan to involve more people to the team. This week, Alexander was on vacation, so he'll likely join us next week, I believe, maybe later. Jans, are you aware when Alexander will join us back?
He is gonna join us next week.
Yeah, so next week Alexander is back, and we might start to use a power of our colleagues to help us, maybe less experienced ones, but yet under our supervision, they could help us to deliver faster once we figure out the great strategy of migration. We also investigated some utilities that might have helped us to migrate this code quicker. However, we found out that there are nothing that can pretty much solve our issue in an instant. Like, for example, we considered code gen by Facebook to take some work from us, but configuring it and basically writing the proper configurations for it would take more time than actually doing them by hand. Therefore, we are still doing the migration by hand, and we hope to basically process all the code with the help of our colleagues. Now, I want to share if that everything we wanted to talk about from the TypeScript migration series. Jans, from your side.
Yes, this is all. Just to mention that we had to uh, make typed all queries instead of using generated types from GraphQL schema. Thus, we will not be able to check what was changed on the backend, like we planned that earlier. But I believe we will find the workaround in the future, but not
Current
in a
release.
release. So when we finish the
Yeah, just to
migration.
explain why we did it, we basically mentioned this previously, but most queries coming from Magento had every field marked as optional in GraphQL schema, which turned out to be a big problem for our implementation. And therefore, we are basically now always assuming that they are coming in. And this is questionable a little bit because we should rely on what server says rather than what we expect server to return. But I believe this decision was weighted by Alexander and Jans, therefore it's all good. Potentially, we should have had more checks instead of migrating this all to strictly typed, always coming back types, but we'll talk about this later on, and we'll find out more in the next episode. Yeah, and maybe you have something to mention, Jans, in regards to
Yes,
this?
also we have a lot of aliases in GraphQL queries, and when you create an alias, then the whole type, the whole data structure doesn't match the actual from GraphQL.
Oh, yes, that's
So
true.
we can. This is another reason why we cannot use GraphQL generated types.
Oh yeah, yeah. So our solution that we initially chose didn't support proper aliasing, which we used in extent. Sure. Thanks. Is that everything we wanted to mention on TypeScript? I believe
Yes.
that is all as well. I have yet something interesting to share. During the long weekend we had here back in Riga, I have made something quite interesting. Yeah, please stop sharing the screen and let me do the screen sharing. So I'll share the current screen. And what I wanted you to show is this amazing example. So what this is actually that is a project that contains some testing class with a namespace that you're all familiar with, and with some plugins to methods and properties, and sometimes even to functions themselves. So what I've did is I have made a TypeScript server plugin that is now able to find uses for all namespaces. If I click them, you can see that it immediately finds references to this namespace in all plugins I have. It same works for the function. However, there is only one reference, so it immediately jumps to the place. And I also did the support for methods and properties of the class and functions. So if I click on method 2, it should open me up a plugin for this method if it exists. And indeed it exists, and it opens it up. And you can also see that it does the same for all the other methods. Like if it has more than one implementation, it shows it off, and if it has only one, it immediately jumps back to the place. And I wanted to say that I support both methods and the functions themselves. So if you click on a function definition, you will also jump to the plugin for this method. And this is in progress, and my current goal is to provide also typings here. So this argument args should ideally match the arguments declared in this method. But I'm not yet sure how I'm going to achieve this. Potentially, I might not be able to, and this will be a story for another day. But I still want to do clicking on method that references the original method, that definition. So this is basically a reference to a method definition, and I want to make sure that if I click on it, it refers me back to the original method. And this is pretty much the plan here, and this will be released as a TypeScript extension and potentially included in projects, so we can use it onwards to easily track files and plug in references. Yeah, that's pretty much the goal. Yeah, so with that said, I believe that we have covered pretty much all of the updates that we have to this date. We plan to continue working on both the TypeScript server and the TypeScript migration. Currently it's handled by Jans alone, but the Alexander will join pretty soon. And stay tuned for another updates in the future. Yeah? And bye-bye.